My parents locked the dining room doors, trapping my son and me inside. They demanded I sign away my entire life savings to cover their fraudulent debts. I smiled, pulled out my phone, and what I did next changed everything. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The mahogany grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a slow, heavy rhythm that seemed to echo the pounding in my own head. I was shivering, despite the suffocating warmth of my parents' overly opulent dining room. I had been battling a severe case of pneumonia for the past 3 weeks, an illness that had drained the color from my face and the strength from my bones. My doctor had explicitly advised against leaving the house, but my mother, Grace, had insisted. "It's just a quiet family dinner, Alina," she had crooned over the phone the day before, her voice dripping with that artificial sweetness I had come to know so well. "We haven't seen you or little Leo in weeks. It will lift your spirits. We are celebrating your recovery." I had foolishly believed her. I had bundled my 12-year-old son, Leo, into the car, promising him a slice of his grandmother's famous cherry pie, and driven across town to the sprawling, gated estate that my father, Henry, insisted on maintaining. Now, sitting at the long, polished oak table, staring at the remnants of a roast I couldn't bring myself to eat, my lungs burned with every shallow breath. I felt incredibly vulnerable, my physical weakness leaving me exposed and exhausted. Leo sat beside me, quietly pushing a piece of potato around his porcelain plate. Across from us sat Grace, her posture impeccably rigid, a diamond necklace catching the light of the crystal chandelier overhead. At the head of the table was Henry, nursing a glass of sparkling water, his tailored suit looking just a fraction too loose on his frame. To my left were my siblings, Emilia and Owen. Emilia, dressed in a designer silk blouse, was aggressively scrolling through her phone, while Owen slouched in his chair, tapping a silver pen against his water glass in a rhythmic, irritating staccato. The air in the room had shifted the moment dessert was supposed to be served. Instead of pie, Henry stood up. He didn't smile. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He simply walked to the heavy double doors of the dining room and, with a loud, metallic click that sent a jolt of ice down my spine, locked them. He pulled the brass key from the keyhole and slipped it into his suit pocket. "What are you doing, Dad?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, hoarse from coughing. Henry walked back to the table, his loafers silent on the Persian rug. From a leather portfolio resting on the sideboard, he extracted a thick stack of legal documents and slammed them onto the table directly in front of me. The loud smack made Leo jump, his small hand instinctively reaching out to grab the sleeve of my sweater. "These are loan restructuring agreements, Alina," Henry said, his voice cold, devoid of any paternal warmth. "My development company has hit a temporary snag. I need liquidity, and I need collateral to secure a bridge loan by tomorrow morning." I blinked, my fever-addled brain struggling to process his words. "A bridge loan? What does that have to do with me? I'm a fraud investigator, Dad, not a bank." Grace let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Don't play coy, darling. We know about the trust fund your late husband left for you and Leo. We know about the equity in your house. You are sitting on millions of dollars of dead capital while your family's legacy is on the line." "Sign the papers, Alina," Owen chimed in, leaning forward, his eyes narrowed. "We aren't asking. You are going to co-sign the loan and put up your assets as collateral." "No," I gasped, my chest tightening. "Absolutely not. That money is for Leo's future, for his education. I am not risking my son's security for your business." Emilia rolled her eyes, finally looking up from her phone. "Oh, please. Your life means nothing to us compared to the family business. Trash like you owns nothing worth keeping anyway. You've always been so selfish." I stared at the people who were supposed to love me, the people who shared my blood. I was sick, exhausted, and desperately trying to protect my child, and they were looking at me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a bank account to be drained. The sheer malice in their eyes was suffocating. I wrapped my arm tightly around Leo, pulling him close to my side as a chilling realization settled over me. The cold steel of their betrayal hurt far more than the sickness in my lungs. The silence that followed Emilia's vicious words was heavier than the humid air in the locked room. I could feel Leo trembling against me. He was old enough to understand the hostility, even if the financial jargon went over his head. He buried his face in my shoulder, his small fingers digging desperately into the knit fabric of my sweater. I pressed a kiss to the top of his head, murmuring soft assurances that everything would be all right, even as my own heart hammered frantically against my ribs. "Let us out," I demanded, forcing as much authority into my weakened voice as I could muster. I tried to stand, my chair scraping harshly against the floor, but a wave of dizziness washed over me, forcing me to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. Henry didn't even flinch. He leaned over the table, pressing his knuckles into the polished wood. "You aren't leaving this room until your signature is on every single page marked with a sticky note, Alina. Do you understand me? I have creditors breathing down my neck." I could lose the house. I could lose everything. "Then you lose it." I fired back, a spark of adrenaline finally pushing through the fever. "I warned you years ago about over-leveraging those commercial properties. You made bad investments, Dad. You cannot steal my son's future to pave over your mistakes." "Steal?" Grace gasped in mock offense, clutching her pearls. "How dare you use that word with your father? We gave you life. We raised you. You owe us this. You have always been the difficult one, Alina, so stubbornly independent, so eager to prove you didn't need us. Well, now we need you, and you are going to do your duty." I looked at Owen, who had stood up and walked over to stand behind my chair, looming over me to block any potential path to the door. "Sign it, Alina," he muttered, his voice low and threatening. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You know Dad has connections. He could make things very difficult for you at your firm. A few phone calls, a few whispers about your mental stability after your husband's passing. You could lose your job, too." The sheer audacity of the threat left me momentarily breathless. They were holding my child and me hostage, demanding my financial ruin, and threatening my career all in the same breath. I looked around the room, taking in their expressions. There was no remorse. There was no love. There was only desperate greed and a cold, calculating entitlement. They genuinely believed that they owned me, that my success and my security were merely extensions of their own wealth, to be harvested whenever they saw fit. I looked down at the thick stack of papers. My trained eyes, even blurred by illness, caught glimpses of the text. Extremely high interest rates, predatory lending terms, clauses that would allow the seizure of my home upon a single missed payment by my father's company. It wasn't a bridge loan, it was financial suicide. They were tying me to a sinking ship with an anchor made of my own money. A deep, unfamiliar calm suddenly washed over me. It was the icy clarity that always settled in my mind right before I cracked a massive fraud case at work. The panic receded, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. They thought they had cornered a frightened, sickly woman. They thought they were holding all the cards because they had locked a door. I slowly lowered myself back into my chair, my breathing steadying. I gently stroked Leo's hair, comforting him, while my mind raced miles ahead of the people standing over me. They were acting out of desperation, fueled by an arrogant assumption of their own superiority. They thought I was just the quiet, dutiful daughter they could bully into submission, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the absolute audacity of my family's demands, one had to understand the history we shared, a history built on my silent sacrifices and their endless consumption. For as long as I could remember, Henry had presented himself to the world as a titan of real estate development. He wore bespoke suits, drove imported luxury cars, and insisted on hosting lavish charity galas that ensured his face was regularly plastered across the local society pages. Grace played the role of the devoted philanthropic wife perfectly, obsessed with appearances, social standing, and ensuring everyone knew exactly how much their imported marble countertops cost. But the facade was a meticulously crafted illusion. I knew this better than anyone. When I was 22, freshly graduated with a degree in forensic accounting, I discovered the first crack in his empire. I had offered to help him organize his books for tax season, only to uncover a tangled web of moved assets, unpaid contractors, and shell companies designed to hide massive, hemorrhaging losses. Confronting him had been my first mistake. Instead of apologizing, he had manipulated my youthful loyalty, begging me to help him restructure and keep the family out of bankruptcy. I spent 2 years working 90-hour weeks for him, untangling his mess, negotiating with angry vendors, and pulling him back from the brink of total ruin. Did I receive a thank you? No. I received a pat on the head, while Amelia and Owen were gifted European vacations and down payments for their own luxury apartments, funded by the very money I had managed to salvage. I realized then that my role in the family was not to be loved, but to be useful. I was the safety net they resented having to use. Shortly after, I left his company, cut my financial ties to them, and built my own career from the ground up, eventually becoming a senior investigator for a major financial regulatory firm. My independence was a constant source of irritation for Henry and Grace. My success highlighted their own financial instability. When my husband passed away in a tragic accident 5 years ago, leaving Leo and me with a substantial life insurance policy and a well-funded trust, my parents' grief was noticeably overshadowed by a sudden, intense interest in my estate planning. They asked probing questions about the trust's executor, about the liquidity of the funds, and about my investment strategies. I had stonewalled them completely, erecting a firm boundary that they had respected, until today. Now, sitting in the locked dining room, I watched Henry pace near the head of the table. He was the primary architect of this nightmare. He was a man who believed his own lies so thoroughly that reality was an offensive concept to him. He didn't see himself as a failing businessman resorting to extortion. He saw himself as a visionary unfairly targeted by a difficult economy, fully justified in demanding his daughter's sacrifice. "The clock is ticking, Alina," Henry said, checking a gold Rolex watch that I happened to know was bought on credit. "My associates need these scanned and emailed by midnight. If you force me to default, the domino effect will destroy Amelia's boutique and Owen's consulting firm. You will be ruining your brother and sister." "My consulting firm relies on Dad's development contracts," Owen added, his tone dripping with self-pity. He was a consultant in name only, essentially collecting a 6-figure salary from Henry for doing nothing more than attending lunches and playing golf. "If he goes under, I go under. Do you really want that on your conscience?" "And my lifestyle brand," Amelia chimed in, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "My investors will pull out if the family name is dragged through the mud in a bankruptcy proceeding. You are being unbelievably selfish, Alina. Think about the family for once in your miserable life." I listened to them lay their failures at my feet, demanding I burn my son's future to keep them warm. Henry stood there, his polished exterior barely hiding the desperate, unethical core of a man who had built a life on quicksand and expected me to act as the concrete foundation. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource, and they were about to find out exactly what happens when you try to forcefully extract resources from an expert in financial fraud. The click of the lock should have been the sound of my submission. In their minds, they had perfectly executed a trap, isolating the weak, sickly daughter and using her child as leverage to force compliance. But as I sat there, the frantic beating of my heart began to slow, replaced by the steady, rhythmic hum of my professional training. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air burning my inflamed lungs, and forced my posture to straighten. I was not just Alina, the disappointing daughter. I was Alina, senior financial fraud investigator for the Federal Regulatory Commission. I spent my days dismantling multi-million-dollar Ponzi schemes, tracing offshore accounts through labyrinths of shell companies, and interrogating corporate criminals whose intellect vastly dwarfed my father's. "If you expect me to sign these," I said, my voice eerily calm, cutting through the heavy silence of the dining room, "I need to read them. I do not sign legal documents blindly, Dad. You taught me that much." Henry hesitated, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He clearly expected tears, begging, or perhaps a hysterical attempt to break a window. He did not expect cool, professional detachment. "There is nothing to read that I haven't already explained," he snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "It's a standard collateral agreement. Now sign it." "Standard?" I echoed, reaching out with a trembling hand to pull the heavy stack of paper toward me. "Nothing about this is standard, Henry. You locked me in a room." I deliberately dropped the title Dad. The man standing before me had forfeited that right the moment he used my son to extort me. "Just let her read them, Henry," Grace sighed loudly, sipping from her crystal water glass with exaggerated annoyance. "Let her have her little moment of rebellion before she does what she's told. We have all night." I flipped open the heavy leather cover. My eyes, trained to spot anomalies in thousands of pages of financial jargon, immediately locked onto the core details. The lender wasn't a traditional bank. It was a private equity firm notorious for predatory lending and aggressive asset stripping. The interest rate was exorbitant, designed to ensure default. But more importantly, the document listed the borrower not as Henry's primary development company, but as a subsidiary LLC I had never heard of, Apex Holdings Group. Under the table, out of their line of sight, my left hand slipped into my cardigan pocket and gripped my phone. I didn't need to look at the screen. Years of discreetly recording notes during hostile interviews had taught me how to navigate my device entirely by touch. I unlocked it using the fingerprint scanner and opened my encrypted messaging app. They had forgotten who I was. Or, more accurately, they had never cared enough to understand what I actually did for a living. They thought fraud investigator meant I audited local businesses for missing petty cash. They had no idea that for the past 6 months, I had been quietly, meticulously investigating them. It had started innocently enough. Henry had asked for a small loan of $50,000 a year ago, claiming a temporary cash flow issue. My professional instincts had flared. I ran a basic background check on his corporate filings just to ensure I wasn't throwing money into a sinking ship. What I found was a horrifying labyrinth of debt, forged signatures, and embezzled contractor funds. I had spent my evenings building a shadow dossier on my own father, compiling irrefutable evidence of his impending collapse, strictly to protect Leo and myself from the fallout. I had a dead man's switch prepared, a timed email containing a comprehensive file of his financial crimes, ready to be sent to the SEC and the FBI. With my thumb, I navigated to the draft, my eyes never leaving the fraudulent contract in front of me. I just needed to stall. I needed to confirm the final pieces of the puzzle directly from their mouths before I hit send. "This subsidiary," I said, tapping the page with my index finger, keeping my tone mild and inquisitive. "Apex Holdings Group. I don't recognize this one, Henry. When did you establish it?" Henry's polished demeanor slipped for a fraction of a second. A muscle in his jaw twitched, and he quickly stepped forward, attempting to pull the portfolio out of my hands. "That is internal corporate structuring, Alina. It is entirely above your head and, frankly, none of your business. The only page that concerns you is the signature line on page 42. I slammed my hand down flat over the document, pinning it to the table. The sudden, sharp movement caused Emilia to jump in her seat. "Actually, it is entirely my business if you expect me to pledge my home as collateral for it," I countered, looking up directly into his eyes. The fever was making me sweat, but my mind was crystalline. Because if I had to guess, based on the phrasing in Section 4, Apex Holdings isn't a development subsidiary at all. It's a liability sinkhole. You've transferred all the toxic debt from your main company into this LLC, haven't you? "Don't be ridiculous," Henry scoffed, but his voice was an octave too high. He began to pace again, the leather of his expensive shoes squeaking slightly on the hardwood floor. "You don't know what you are talking about. You are a glorified accountant." "I am a federal investigator," I corrected him, my voice gaining strength with every word. I turned to look at my mother. Grace was staring at me, her brow furrowed in confusion, clearly disliking the shift in power dynamics. "Mom, do you know what he's doing? He isn't trying to save the business. He's trying to save himself from federal prison. This bridge loan isn't to pay contractors. It's to pay off the private investors he defrauded last year. It's a Ponzi structure. He's using new money, my money, to pay off the old investors before they realize the buildings they funded don't actually exist. Stop lying, Alina, Owen shouted, slamming his hand on the back of my chair. Dad's company is fine. We just have a minor liquidity issue because of the zoning board delays. You are just making up excuses because you are a selfish, greedy little. Owen, I interrupted, my voice slicing through his tantrum like a surgical blade. How much did your consulting firm gross last year? 300,000. 4. Owen blinked, caught off guard by the sudden pivot. What? What does that have to do with anything? I bring valuable strategic insight to the table. I let out a short, hollow laugh. You bring nothing to the table. I pulled the wire transfers, Owen. Every single dollar your firm earned last year came directly from Dad's investors' escrow accounts. You aren't a consultant. You are a money launderer. He's funneling stolen funds to you to hide them from the IRS. The room plunged into an absolute, suffocating silence. Owen's face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked frantically at Henry, seeking reassurance, but Henry was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. That's a lie, Owen stammered, stepping away from me as if I were suddenly contagious. Dad, tell her she's lying. Henry said nothing. He just stared at me, the arrogant facade finally cracking, revealing the terrified, desperate old man underneath. And you, Emilia, I continued, turning my gaze to my sister, who was clutching her phone to her chest as if it could shield her. Your luxury boutique. It operates at a 20% net loss every quarter. The only way you keep the doors open is through anonymous, cash donations to your holding company. Donations that magically match the exact amounts missing from Mom's philanthropic foundation. How dare you? Grace shrieked, leaping to her feet, her chair toppling over backwards with a loud crash. My charity does vital work for the community. You are a spiteful, jealous creature making up vile accusations because you can't stand to see your family succeed. Your charity, I said, my voice rising over her screaming, is a slush fund, and I can prove it. The carefully constructed illusion of the wealthy, unified family shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of me. The dining room, once a symbol of their oppressive power over me, suddenly felt like a holding cell where they were the inmates turning on each other. Give me the papers, Alina. Now, Henry demanded. His voice was no longer polished. It was a guttural, desperate growl. He lunged forward, his hands grasping for the portfolio. I yanked the folder off the table, holding it tight against my chest, shielding Leo at the same time. Leo was terrified, crying silently, his face buried in my side. Don't touch me, I warned, my tone lethal. If you lay a hand on me, I will add assault and battery to the list of federal charges. Charges? Emilia shrieked, her designer facade completely dissolving into panic. She grabbed Henry's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. Dad, what is she talking about? What charges? Is it true about the charity? Is it true about my store? Shut up, Emilia. Henry roared, shoving her away so hard she stumbled against the sideboard, sending a crystal vase crashing to the floor. The shattering glass echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. She's bluffing. She doesn't have anything. She's trying to confuse us. Grace was hyperventilating, pressing a hand to her chest. Henry, tell me she's lying. Tell me the foundation money is where it's supposed to be. Her eyes darted wildly from Henry to me, the loyalty she had demanded from me mere minutes ago completely evaporating in the face of her own potential ruin. Dad, if the feds look at my firm, I'll go to jail. Owen cried out, his voice cracking with panic. He was pacing the length of the room, running his hands through his hair. You said the escrow transfers were perfectly legal. You told me the lawyers approved them. They were legal, Henry shouted back, cornered and sweating profusely. He turned his wild eyes back to me, pointing a trembling finger. You listened to me, you ungrateful little brat. You are going to sign those papers, and then you are going to keep your mouth shut. I am your father. I built this family. I can destroy you." "You already tried to destroy me," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady whisper. I pulled my hand out from under the table, bringing my phone up into the light of the chandelier. "You tried to take my son's future. You told me my life meant nothing to you. You called me trash." I looked at the four of them, my father sweating in his ruined suit, my mother gasping for air amidst her shattered social standing, my brother and sister crying over their impending criminal liabilities. They had built a house of cards, and they had demanded I step inside right as it was collapsing. "You wanted to know about my professional skills, Dad?" I asked, my thumb hovering over the screen of my phone. I don't bluff. For the last 6 months, I have compiled every forged document, every illegal wire transfer, every fake invoice you ever created. I have the IP addresses, the bank routing numbers, and the dates of every time you looted Mom's charity to fund Amelia's failing store and Owen's fake salary. Henry took a step back, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. "Alina, please, let's be reasonable. We are family." "We were never a family," I replied coldly. "You were a cartel, and I was your contingency plan." With a deliberate, highly visible motion, I pressed my thumb down on the screen. The small swoosh sound of an outgoing email chimed softly in the quiet room. I just forwarded the entire encrypted dossier to the director of the Securities and Exchange Commission, with carbon copies to the FBI field office and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, I stated, placing the phone face up on the table. The screen glowed with the words "message sent." "The trap didn't spring when you locked the door, Henry. It sprang when you handed me those papers and proved your intent to commit extortion." The soft, cheerful chime of my phone confirming the email had been successfully delivered sounded like a deafening gong in the suffocating silence of the locked dining room. For 5 excruciatingly long seconds, absolutely no one moved. The air was entirely devoid of oxygen, entirely consumed by the monstrous gravity of what I had just done. Henry stared at the glowing screen of my phone, his mouth slightly ajar, his eyes wide and completely unblinking. The healthy, artificially tanned hue of his skin had vanished, replaced by a sickly, mottled gray. He looked as though he had just been physically struck by a high-speed train. You didn't," he finally stammered, his voice stripped of all its former booming authority. It was a pathetic, reedy wheeze. "Tell me you didn't just send that, Alina. Tell me this is a sick, twisted joke." "I don't joke about federal felonies, Henry," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was threatening to beat its way out of my ribcage. I kept my arm wrapped tightly around Leo, acting as a physical shield between my child and the crumbling sociopath standing at the head of the table. "The SEC's automated intake system registers complaints instantly. Your files are currently being downloaded onto a secure federal server. By 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, 6 forensic accountants will be dissecting your life's work. The game is entirely over." A primal, guttural noise erupted from the back of Henry's throat. It wasn't a scream, it was the sound of a cornered animal realizing the trap had violently snapped shut. He lunged forward, his hands outstretched, violently sweeping the crystal water pitchers and china plates off the table in a desperate, blind attempt to grab my phone. "Give it to me." He roared, glass shattering around our feet, water soaking into the expensive Persian rug. "I'll smash it. I'll call my IT guy. We can recall the server data, we can." "You can't recall an email from the federal government, you absolute fool." I shouted back, kicking my chair backward and pulling Leo away from the table, out of his reach. "It's gone. The evidence is gone, and you are going to prison." Just as Henry took a step toward me, his fists clenched in a blind rage. A sound pierced the chaos. Ding-dong, the cheerful, melodic chime of the estate's front doorbell echoed through the expansive house. It was a pleasant, welcoming sound that clashed so violently with the sheer terror in the dining room that it froze everyone in their tracks. Grace let out a blood-curdling gasp, her hands flying to her face, smudging her expensive mascara down her cheeks. "The investors," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute, unadulterated horror. "Henry, the board members, they're here." I stared at her, the final piece of their arrogant puzzle clicking perfectly into place. Henry hadn't just planned to extort me tonight. He had been so blindingly confident in his ability to bully me into submission that he had invited his lead investors over for a celebratory after-dinner drink to toast the successful restructuring of his capital. He had planned to parade my stolen assets in front of them as proof of his financial genius. Ding-dong. The bell chimed again, louder this time. Footsteps echoed in the marble hallway outside. It was Maria, the head housekeeper. We could hear the heavy wooden front doors swinging open, followed by the booming, jovial voices of older men and women greeting her. "Don't make a sound," Henry hissed at me, his eyes darting frantically toward the locked dining room doors. He plunged his hand into his suit pocket, his fingers frantically searching for the brass key he had used to trap us. His hands were shaking so violently he couldn't grasp it. "Elena, I am begging you, do not say a word. I can still fix this. I can tell them the deal was delayed. Just be quiet." "Mr. Henry," Maria's voice called out from the other side of the locked doors. She sounded confused. "The dining room is locked, sir. Your guests are in the grand foyer." "Give me a minute, Maria," Henry yelled, his voice cracking horribly. But Maria, efficient and accustomed to managing the sprawling estate, didn't wait. We heard the metallic scrape of her master key sliding into the lock from the outside. With a heavy click, the deadbolt retracted, and Maria pushed the heavy mahogany double doors wide open. The immediate contrast between the two rooms was staggering. The dining room was a scene of devastated wreckage, chairs overturned, broken crystal glittering violently on the wet rug, Henry sweating and trembling, Grace sobbing quietly into her hands. Beyond the threshold, bathed in the warm, inviting light of the grand foyer chandelier, stood four of the wealthiest, most influential private investors in the city. At the forefront was Arthur Sterling, a towering man in his late 60s who controlled the largest private equity fund in the state. Beside him was Elena Vance, a sharp-eyed real estate mogul who had backed Henry's last 3 projects. They were holding crystal flutes of champagne Maria had just handed them, their smiles instantly melting into expressions of profound shock as they took in the chaotic scene before them. "Henry?" Arthur Sterling asked, his deep voice echoing in the sudden silence. He lowered his champagne flute, his eyes narrowing as he took in my father's disheveled state, the broken glass, and then, finally, my pale, furious face and my terrified, tear-stained son. "What in God's name is going on in here? Is everything all right? Where are the finalized bridge loan documents we came to toast?" Henry opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic collision of his two worlds. This was it, the climax of a lifetime of manipulation. The grand, public stage my father had always craved suddenly turned into his execution block. I didn't hesitate. Still holding Leo firmly by the hand, I stepped out from behind the wreckage of the dining table and walked directly out into the grand foyer, placing myself squarely in front of Arthur Sterling and Elena Vance. "There is no bridge loan, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice echoing clearly and calmly off the marble walls of the foyer. The fever in my blood was completely eclipsed by the icy, professional composure of a senior fraud investigator doing her job. "And there is no restructured capital." "Elena," Henry pleaded from the doorway, his voice a pathetic, broken whine. "Elena, stop, please." I ignored him entirely, keeping my eyes locked on the investors. "My name is Elena. I am Henry's daughter, but more importantly, I am a senior financial fraud investigator for the Federal Regulatory Commission. For the last 6 minutes, I have been held captive in that room against my will. For the last 6 months, I have been investigating the man you know as my father." Elena Vance stiffened, her sharp eyes darting from me to Henry. "Investigating him for what exactly?" I reached out and gently plucked the fraudulent leather portfolio from where it had fallen near the doorframe. I held it out to Arthur Sterling. "For operating a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. The buildings you funded over the last 2 years do not exist, Mr. Sterling." He fabricated the contractor invoices. He created a dummy LLC called Apex Holdings Group to absorb the toxic debt, and he has been systematically looting his wife's philanthropic charity to cover the interest payments. Arthur Sterling took the leather binder, his face turning dangerously red as he flipped to the first page. "She's lying." Amelia suddenly shrieked from the dining room, stepping forward, desperate to save her own skin. "Arthur, don't listen to her, she's crazy. She's been sick, she's delusional." "I am not delusional, Amelia," I countered sharply, my voice easily cutting through her hysteria. "And neither is the SEC. I just forwarded a 50-page encrypted dossier containing all the wire transfer logs, forged signatures, and IP addresses to the federal authorities. They will be freezing his accounts, and yours, by tomorrow morning." The word freezing acted like a magical spell, shattering the last remaining bonds of their supposed family loyalty. I had nothing to do with it. Owen suddenly screamed. He lunged forward, physically shoving past Henry to stand in the foyer, throwing his hands up in a gesture of desperate surrender. "Mr. Sterling, you have to believe me. I didn't know the money was stolen. Dad set up the consulting firm. He forced me to sign the escrow transfers. He told me it was a tax loophole. I'll testify. I'll tell the feds everything he did, I swear to God." "Owen, shut your mouth," Henry roared, grabbing his son by the collar of his suit. "Get your hands off me, you criminal." Owen shrieked, violently shoving our father backward. Henry tripped over the threshold, tumbling backward into the ruined dining room, landing hard on his back among the broken crystal. Grace let out a wailing scream, falling to her knees beside him, not to help him up, but to pound her fists weakly against his chest. "You ruined us. You ruined my foundation. My friends will never speak to me again. You fool." I stood in the foyer, holding my son's hand, and watched as the grand, wealthy, untouchable family I had known my entire life tore itself to absolute shreds in front of the very society they had worshipped. Arthur Sterling slowly closed the leather portfolio, looking down at Henry with an expression of absolute, terrifying disgust. "Call my legal team," Arthur said quietly to a leaner Vance, never taking his eyes off my father. "And then call the police. I want my money back, Henry, and I want you to burn." I didn't stay to watch the rest. I picked up my purse, tightened my grip on Leo's hand, and walked out the front doors of the estate, leaving them behind in the wreckage of their own making. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in my life, my lungs felt completely, wonderfully clear. The fallout was not merely a scandal. It was an absolute, scorched-earth financial apocalypse. The sirens didn't arrive that exact night, but the quiet, devastating machinery of federal justice moved with terrifying speed. 48 hours after I walked out of that mansion, I sat on my modest living room couch, sipping hot tea, and watched the local morning news broadcast a live feed of the FBI raiding Henry's corporate headquarters. Agents in windbreakers carried dozens of cardboard boxes of hard drives and files out of the glass building. Shortly after, the camera panned to show Henry, looking 20 years older, stripped of his bespoke suit and wearing a gray sweatshirt, being escorted into the back of a dark federal vehicle, his hands cuffed behind his back. He was denied bail. The flight risk, combined with the staggering scope of the embezzlement, which eventually tallied over $40 million, convinced the judge that Henry was a severe danger to the community. Using my professional network and the pristine reputation I had cultivated at the agency, I quietly ensured that my case file was handled directly by the regional director. I didn't need to push them. The evidence I had compiled was airtight. The financial forensic teams spent weeks unraveling the shell companies, and every thread led exactly where I said it would. Grace's philanthropic foundation was immediately suspended and thoroughly audited. When the investigators found the massive, gaping holes in the charity's accounts, the board of directors forcefully removed her. Without Henry's illicit funds propping up the estate, the bank foreclosed on the mansion within 2 months. Grace, stripped of her diamonds, her social standing, and her sycophantic friends, was forced to move into a tiny, 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. She tried to call me once, leaving a tearful, manipulative voicemail blaming Henry for everything and asking for a small loan to get back on her feet. I deleted the message before she finished her second sentence and permanently blocked her number. My siblings fared no better. Amelia's luxury lifestyle brand imploded overnight when the criminal origins of her funding were made public. Her investors sued her into personal bankruptcy, and the going out of business signs were plastered across her boutique windows before the end of the month. Owen, desperate to avoid a lengthy prison sentence, officially turned state's evidence. He sang like a canary, detailing every single one of Henry's illicit transfers to save his own skin. He still received a 3-year sentence for his role in the money laundering, a poetic justice for the golden boy who thought he was untouchable. They had tried to take everything from me. In the end, they lost it all. Months later, the harsh winter had faded into a beautiful, vibrant spring. My pneumonia was long gone, my lungs clear, and my energy restored. It was a Saturday evening, and the golden hour sunlight was spilling across the back porch of my home. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and fresh-cut grass. I was sitting on the porch swing, a thick, comfortable blanket draped over my legs, watching Leo expertly toss a baseball into a worn leather mitt. He had grown an inch since that awful night, his shoulders a little broader, his smile a little easier. The shadows that had haunted his eyes for weeks after the confrontation had finally receded. I had dedicated an immense amount of time to healing our bond, assuring him daily that he was safe, that his future was secure, and that true family would never put a price tag on his well-being. We had engaged in deep, honest conversations about trust, boundaries, and the reality that sometimes, the people who share your blood are not the people who deserve your loyalty. "Hey, Mom," Leo called out, pausing his pitching routine to walk over to the swing. He climbed up beside me, resting his head comfortably against my shoulder. The simple, trusting weight of him leaning against me was the most precious thing in the world. "Hey, sweetheart," I replied, wrapping an arm around him and pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Tired." "A little," he admitted, looking out at the yard. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the crickets beginning their evening song. "I'm glad we're here, just us." "Me too, Leo, more than you know." He looked up at me, his young face serious and thoughtful. "Are we going to be okay? Really?" I squeezed his shoulder gently, feeling an overwhelming surge of fierce, maternal protective love. I thought about the trust fund that remained completely intact, gathering interest for his college tuition. I thought about the clear title to the home we were sitting in. I thought about the quiet, peaceful life we had successfully defended from the monsters in our own family tree. "We are going to be more than okay, Leo," I promised him, my voice completely steady and entirely true. "We are safe. We are secure. And no one, absolutely no one, will ever make us feel small again." I leaned back against the swing, watching the last rays of the sun dip below the tree line. The storm had passed, the wreckage was cleared, and the quiet, undeniable peace of absolute vindication settled over our home forever.